Yeah, okay.
We're going to consider our calling and role as Christians with wisdom today, ways we can apply it. And before I introduce the speakers, I'll just say to these friends of mine that we have a distinguished group that is gathered with you in person. It's possible we may have some others coming to join us online later on. But my colleague Amy Heinrich is a leader in ministry and has been active with Union Theological Seminary in New York, continues to do so and make an influence there. Behind her, we have folks that we're trying to coax into church membership with us, even though they're members soon to be, we hope, this Presbyterian. I don't know where you'll be. Two ministers. You may know Phil Butin, who is together with Jan, his wife, Jan Butin, are just retiring from Fayetteville, Arkansas. And along the way, I got to know Phil when he was serving as president of San Francisco Theological Seminary. So they've got natural interest in theology. We also have the esteemed chair of our Christian Education Committee, Deborah Alexander, who has spent a life in education as a principal, and her husband, Rich, as well, who your training is as a scientist, isn't that right, Rich? Or
Microbiology.
Microbiology. Oh my God. Well, they were preaching to you today in the announcement that we had about stewardship. And we also have David and Kathy Husingfeld, longtime members of the church. And David was the guy who thought that I might do all right at Libertyville. And so far I'm hanging in there 20 years. So that's not bad, David. Thank you for that. And Kathy, joy to be here. They have a son-in-law who is a stated clerk in National Capital. Isn't that where they are right now? Yeah. And then in back, we've got Carmen Lago, who's a graduate of the spirituality program that they had for many years at Columbia Theological Seminary, and spent her life vocation in education, teaching languages, is on the forefront of leadership in our Cuba partnership. So you got a bunch of wise owls gathered to hear what you have to share today, and thank you guys. I think the plan is to let Chip be our first to speak. Dr. Chip Dobbs-Allsopp got his PhD from the Johns Hopkins University in Ancient Near Eastern Studies. That's right, Amy's son went to Johns Hopkins. And her sons are soccer players like yours too. I can't, but and they like Arsenal too, I think.
There we go. Not a good day yesterday, but that's all right.
Don't figure it out. I always was amazed at Chip at seminary because he's lived with and conquered, in my estimation, dyslexia. So, you know, you're reading Hebrew backwards, and he passed the thing. He didn't ask for any special consideration when he went through examination. Not only that, did he master it, and he has helped us plumb the riches of poetry. I think he's widely assumed to be our foremost scholar in the English language on ancient Semitic poetry, and in particular, he's known for his commentaries on the Book of Lamentations. So when it comes to wisdom literature, we're in good shape with Chip. In addition, he is the James Lennox Librarian at Princeton Theological Seminary, if you can imagine that. So we're just really pleased to have Chip's leadership here. Chip, have you done two of our men's retreats? There's just one, I can't recall.
Wait, what'd you say?
You led a men's retreat for us, right? Was it two?
I did. Yeah, no, one for sure.
Okay,
one. I still have the fleece that keeps me warm.
Yeah, I think Rich was there for that one probably. And the fun thing about that was that he was sharing with us about the King James Bible, and that led him down a study that led him to appreciate the work of Walt Whitman and Whitman scholars, which is out of his field, but he studied how the King James Bible influenced the writing of Walt Whitman. Isn't that something? So we're really great, you know, scholarship such as his helps train. He ran the PhD program at Princeton for a long time. So his leadership has led to sharing of insight with others. And he's doing all this after having lived with retinitis pigmentosa for most of his life, and he's got a loss of vision. So he sees in new ways, okay? So we'll have his wisdom with us today. Terry, good to have you with us, also to have you with us. Okay, so I'll also, in a moment, I'll introduce Gordon, but let's get going and do some thinking about, oh good, I'm kind of even a little bit ahead of schedule, gives us more time for teaching. And I'll share a word about Gordon when we are introducing him. Chip, do you want to share a word about Proverbs 8, wisdom at the crossroads, or your vision of wisdom and how it came to be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So Brian has chosen one of the all-time great wisdom poems to sort of thematize the window after. I will not do the poem justice in 15 minutes. Gordon will tap me out here. So when it gets to be about 15 minutes, I'm going to try to make 4 points and can always come back to them and elaborate as we go. The poem itself has an opening section of 3 verses, and then a closing framing section. So verses 1 to 3, and then verses 32 to 36. In between that, there are 3 other sections of the poem, and they all feature personified wisdom. And so I'm going to reach into 4 of those sections to sort of pull out some things that I will want to speak to about the poem, but do a little midrash on as well, or a riff on midrash, if you will. We would start in the opening sections, and the sections which I think we'll linger on a little bit more, because those are where Brian has thematized the poem, wisdom standing at the crossroads. So you have that opening poem, the opening couplet of the poem that notes that wisdom cries out, right? And understanding gives forth her voice, right, everywhere. So this idea that wisdom is out there, and then it 2 sets of couplets sort of form a merism. A merism is, these extreme ideas that taken together sort of symbolize a larger whole. And in verse 2, you have that reference to wisdom at the very top of the heights, and then and the other side of that would be literally on the road, on the path, or as the variant phrase that Brian has taken, at the crossroads, right? And so this is a merism. If you think of the geography, the topography of of Israel, or the Middle East even today, where outside of the cities, you have these cliffs and rocks, and they're crisscrossed by roads. And so this is a merism for the sort of the space that humans travel, but it's outside the urban areas, outside the towns. And then in verse 3, you have those sort of no longer a merism in the couplet itself. There's just 3 ways of repeating the idea of the gates of the city. And the gates of the city were one traditional location for the elders of the communities to gather and make decisions, to speak wisdom, to talk to each other. These gates in these ancient cities from the historical period would, for a walled city, they would be 2, 3, 4, sometimes 6 chambers. They would have these chambers that you'd have these towers that would grow, and that would be the protection, because the city gate is, of course, the most vulnerable part of a walled city. But often these towers were lined with benches. And again, it's where the communal discourse happened, and really a quite easy gloss for us is when we think about the public square today, right? Or at least we figuratively think about the public square. And so the the bid that the opening part of the poem is making is that wisdom speaks everywhere in the inhabited world. Those spaces that are outside, along the way, as opposed and within the city, right? And the midrash here then is to and Brian has already sort of gestured at this because our new library, and we'll just think of it very particularly here, libraries are these places of wisdom in our society. And certainly for us at Princeton Seminary, this beautiful library does that. And it sits up high, and the window that you all have selected is on the second floor, and it looks down, and it does absolutely look down on Mercer Street. And there are these paths, sidewalks that crisscross and lead up to the entrance. And there's a way in which I won't go into it, but you could the way that I don't think the architect understood this. The sloping walkway up the stairs mimics the old sort of ways that they would lead up to a city gate. They would want to turn people so that their shield, which was usually on the left, was on the right. They'd make a turn left, and then you'd go into the tower. Anyway, so our path does that, and it takes us, and we do have that tower out in front, and there are benches there, and there are the opening doors. And so the midrash, I think, makes sense a little bit. And it's also, and Brian and Gordon and I, who inhabited these liminal spaces long ago together, students, whether they're master students or doctoral students, are here for a limited time. And they're here to do some book learning in the library, but they're also here to do some practical learning. And I do think the idea of the symbolism that Brian has emphasized, where you're there to make use of these fabulous resources, but you look out that window because ultimately it's the world, it's the inhabited spaces that we inhabit, where what you learn, you take out, and you continue to think about that. All right, so that's my first section. The second is in verse 4, the next verse, and here wisdom addresses has what is the most inclusive, broad-ranging address in all of Proverbs. And I sort of want to loop this around in terms of back in our day, the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible came out. It was a long process of buildup, but it came out in the mid-'80s. And one of the things that they did in that translation, and maybe you use it in your church, is to use inclusive language for people. And at the time, it thought it was a fairly progressive, radical idea. It has not worn too well over these last 40-odd years. If anything, gender identity has gotten way more complex. And there was always the problem that in sort of reaching for this kind of inclusivity, we are in danger of erasing or occluding the sort of gender constructs of old. Part of what it means to have a scriptural heritage that comes from another time and another place is to wrestle with that historicity of that time. And there are times when we might be surprised about how those old texts can imagine things differently. And this is one of those. So the address, again, it uses a merism. It uses two groups. It uses Ishim, which is the plural of man, so a group of men that it addresses to you, O men. And the B'nai Adam, and the B'nai Anam are all people. And so these taken together are everybody. The conceit of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, which is a very bit of book learning. We have other compositions from the ancient world that are very much like this. And the conceit, and if I'll point you to the very beginning of Proverbs, Proverbs 1:8, where we get our first teaching, and the son is addressed. Listen to the teaching of your father, or the discipline, the mutsar, which I'll come back to in a moment, which can be teaching, but they didn't spare the rod back in the day. And do not neglect the instruction, the Torah of your mother. And I love that Torah is used. Torah is not there in its sort of specialized sense of the first 5 books of the Bible quite yet, or even the law, but of the mother's. But that will resonate. I like as well. But what this gestures to is the conceit of Proverbs is the advice, the wisdom of the father passed down to the son. Now, the NRSV, in its efforts to clean this up, wanted to include children, and but that's not the conceit of the written book. I'll come back to the home setting at the end here, but I suggest that, and we get the reference to the banim down in the last section of the poem as it begins in verse 32, and now. Again, it probably uses children there as well in the NRSV, but it does have the sons in view eventually. But that entire section from verse 4 to verse 31 is framed by this reference to all of the people, the B'nai Adam, and it's that last word in 31 as well. So you have this nice little framing. So wisdom not only wants to speak and be relevant at all aspects of the inhabited space for human beings, but she wants to speak to all human beings, and even the fools that come in in the next verse. And so this is very un-Proverbs like, right? The prototypical student back that they have in mind is the male, the boy, the adolescent boy, right? And this is not what this poem does. So this poem has this breadth that stands out and is inclusive in a way, and it does its own bit of gender bending here. That is, she personified wisdom is presented as the premier father figure, the premier teacher. She too, back down further in the poem, will talk about her mutsar, her discipline, her teaching, right? Very clearly taking over the role of the father. And so that's, so you have this sort of overthrowing of this gender role. You have this sort of inclusivity of address, and she herself is a little queer. She's not doing it as a mother figure either. So it's, again, I say all this simply to say that sometimes it's worthwhile to sort of live a little with the text that the ancients have bequeathed to us. All right, my third move here, and this I will go down and can be fairly quick about. I gesture to that most famous part of the poem, beginning in verse 22, where we get Yahweh creating wisdom at the very beginning of creation. So the poet knows all the creation traditions and puts wisdom before everything, right? And this does 2 interesting things. One, it gives wisdom her authority, right? She is next to God, and has this primary role there beside God at creation. She also, the implication of this is that the acquisition of wisdom, the absorption of knowledge, in the argument of this poem becomes the way that humans can become the closest to God. Now, we might want to think that issue through for a Christian point of view, but I think there's ways in which an incarnational theology could actually could work with that. But it does, for me at least, underscore, if I use this poem, the sort of the importance of what goes on at a place like Princeton Seminary, where both the book learning and the practical learning that we're doing is really critical to how we think of ourselves as the people of God. Um, there's lots more one could say about those wonderful lines, but I'm gonna end by coming back um, um, to the address to the Banim at the end of the poem, the boys, and remind us that even though the the conceit, the written conceit of the book as a literary object is, this elite sort of product, right? It would be kings leaving that what we hear in other books like this, kings leaving their teaching their wisdom to their sons, or elite scribes to their sons or nephews. And so this is sort of the model, but the more mundane model that is built on is the fact that in the traditional societies of Israel and Judah and Persian period Yehud, learning took place in a house, right? They didn't have schools as we think of them. They didn't have a Princeton Seminary. If you wanted to become a potter, likely your dad was a potter, and you were going to sit there and learn from your dad or from your uncle, right? Towns and neighborhoods were very kinship based. These family and if you're going to learn these households were subsistence households, so they would plant their vegetables and plant fields with wheat, and if you're going to learn to do that, you work with your dad. For daughters, they would work with their mother to learn how to prepare food, how to cook food, um, how to sew. It should be emphasized, even though we do not have a lot of literature that sort of focuses on domesticity in ancient Israel and Judah. Um, those households, the productivity of the women in particular, were easily more than 50% of the productivity of the household. They don't survive without the contribution of the mother and the daughters. And so there's a way in which that gesture in 1:8 to the teaching and the instruction of the mother and the father, I want to leave us with, because this sort of democratizes, in my mind, this whole wisdom stuff that, I've had a privilege to play a very specialized role in here at Princeton Seminary. But the fact is that every one of us, as we go and make our way through the world, are these wisdom teachers and learners. We teach our children. We learn from our coworkers. I think this is the nature. It's a practical wisdom. We sometimes think bookish things, but as I said, that at the very beginning, wisdom is about how we thrive in this world, and every one of you here have things to teach and have things to learn from your neighbors, and it seems to me that that's where the bigger project in Proverbs is, and sort of the inclusivity that we get is a mandate for us to sort of go out and do this stuff, to listen for wisdom wherever we happen to be, at whatever crossroads in our life we happen to be. And I will leave it at that. Turn it over to Gordon.
Can I ask a question?
Stay right there.
Yeah.
You're good.
Let's pause for a minute, just to see if there are any questions
Yes.
for Chip.
Chip, thank you so much. I love
Can you
that.
hear Amy as she's posing a question? If not, I'm gonna turn on the microphone.
Can you hear me, Chip?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Could you say a little more about your claim that wisdom preceded creation? I thought you said that not only did the poet know the creation tradition and was standing side by side with the creator, but it preceded Genesis, the act of creating. Did you make that claim?
No, it's pretty clear. So there are many. I mean, we think of the two great creation stories in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and 3. but there were actually many more creation traditions in ancient Israel. But it also is pretty clear that the Proverbs 8 poet, and Proverbs 8 is probably one of the later elements to the opening section of Proverbs 1 to 9, knew the priestly, that Genesis 1 account. And so the poet very intentionally, if you read it, puts the creation of wisdom at the very beginning. There is no in the ancient world, there is no creation ex nihilo. So there's always something there already. But the first act, right? That first line in 22 is Yahweh created wisdom, right? And then the rest of the poem there is emphasizing and underscoring and underlying that this was done, before all these other acts that we know from, for example, from the priestly version, and it ends quite remarkably, right? For the delight of the Bnei Adam, right? For human beings. So I mean, wisdom. Not only was she there first. There is this joyousness and delight for sort of a human-centered looking at the nature of creation. I don't know if that clarifies that.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And now I want to get into Gordon and then see how you put the two of their brains together with the questions that might generate. But if there are any other particular things you want to take up at this point, I just want to say I should have read Proverbs 8, Chip. So that they would have the point of reference. And I left my cell phone in my study. I just came down from preaching in the chapel and I didn't bring my Bible with me. What in the world am I thinking as a preacher for Bible study? So I'll just give you homework assignment. Go home and read Proverbs 8. It's a beautiful piece of poetry, and that's what Chip's been referencing for us.
And I want to say the thing I didn't say, that there's a phrase in that first the second line that your phrase at the crossroads. There are two. The common word in Hebrew, bait, is there, right? And if you look at the King James, it's places of paths, which doesn't make any sense, although it might be, a house at, along a path. Which is cool, but it's more likely that it is a Hebrew, an Aramaic loanword that's made its way into Hebrew, and that means at or between, right, at the intersection of, and the word for paths there too, nadiv or nadiva is also an Aramaic loanword. So what I love, and I do all these funky ancient Semitic languages, and Hebrew is, Hebrew Bible, but my favorite ancient language is Aramaic. So I love the fact that Brian has chosen this phrase with this Aramaic inflection in it. So a little bit technical stuff, but that's all right, fun. All right, I'll let
the scholars having us go to King James Version. How about that? I wasn't ready for that. Okay, so does not wisdom cry and understanding put forth her voice? She standeth on top of the high places, by the way in the places of the paths. She cries at the gates, the entrance of the city, coming in the doors. Unto you, O man, I call, my voice is to the sons of man, et cetera, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's stop that share. I just want to name now that we've got my other friend, Gordon Mikoski, with us. Gordon, I know, has been past president of the Association of Practical Theologians. Did I get that title right?
Theology.
Practical theology. Yes, exactly. And so with that, I think you'll understand how well appreciated Gordon is in his field by his peers. I appreciated the work he's written, a book about baptism that gives a real depth of understanding. He and his, my wife and I are both pastors. He and his wife are both pastors. Jan and Phil are both pastors. And Gordon and his bride started ministry at Grosse Pointe Memorial when I started ministry at Kirk in the Hills, both in Detroit Presbyterian ages ago. Amy at that time was at First Pres Ann Arbor, Gordon, okay? And So, one of the things that, he was able to do is integrate his understanding from congregations into his ministry. And I think he's one of the more valued members of the faculty in that respect, to help students integrate their deeper understanding. And he's drawn much upon the work of Gregory of Nyssa, one of the early patristic teachers of the faith, in some of his writing on baptism. But more than that, I've observed through the years that Gordon is a very keen observer of culture. He sees and observes the ways that things are being acquired in terms of wisdom in the culture writ large. And I also think he's a person who really gets what goes on in congregations. So I'm eager to hear what Gordon will have to share with us about his take on wisdom, current trends where people seem to gather wisdom, and maybe even some thoughts about how the church can have something to say in light of what our depth of wisdom is today. Gordon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I just want to make a quick comment about the question that was posed to Chip on Proverbs 8:22. I would just note that that's a source of endless controversy in the early church about whether the second person of the Trinity was a creature or was the Son from all eternity. And that verse in particular was kind of a bugaboo that they had to really wrestle with for a long time. Instead of a candle with one wick with light radiating out, and the idea in a certain way, like Proverbs 8 is in a Platonic mode, is the light closest to the flame would be like the sun, and then you got the Holy Spirit. It's a radiation scheme. Instead, what the early church fathers, including Gregory of Nyssa, said was, what you really have is a candle that has three wicks. There's just one light, but three persons. But we can come back to that if you want. So I want to talk about first.
Just want to identify that Bill Buchanan is a Trinitarian scholar, so you know.
Yeah, I read his book.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I want to start first by thinking about what is wisdom. I think about wisdom as knowledge that's combined with reflected experience. To get wisdom, it's more than just knowledge. You have to have some judgment. And the judgment can't just be willy-nilly. It has to be born of a lot of life experience that you reflect upon. And somehow bringing those things together is what wisdom is about. But more than that, it's also aimed at effective action. Right? Wisdom is about doing things in the right way, or in a way that's going to provide some guidance to go forward especially when the way is not clear. So in that regard, there's some resonance between the biblical traditions about wisdom and what Aristotle taught about different kinds of knowledge. There's, for Aristotle, three kinds of knowledge. There's pursuit of things for their own sake, just out of curiosity, and to wonder at the heavens and nature and so on. That's in Greek, theoria, where we get our word theory from. There's another kind of knowledge, which is the kind of technical knowledge that comes from artisans who make beautiful things. And that is techne. Actually, that's where we get the word technical from. The kind of knowledge that most resonates with what Chip was talking about is phronesis for Aristotle, which is to think about rational universal principles in light of particulars or cases. It's a kind of political knowledge, actually, where you have general and specific brought together, and you think in a way that leads to effective action. So practical theology as a field, loves the wisdom literature for sure, and there's a lot of overlap between our fields. Practical theology as a discipline reads widely in two areas. One, theological knowledge, so that would be Bible, history of Christian thinking and practice, and also dogmatic or systematic theology. At the same time, we also read a lot of sociology, psychology, anthropology, and other human sciences. And practical theology intentionally kind of brings the theological and the human sciences together, but in a way that hopefully produces wisdom. And that's a lot of what we're about. Unlike people who are historians or sociologists, practical theologians are never really satisfied with simply a really deep interpretation or explanation of something. We also want to know, well, now what? Or so what? I remember reading a book about the history of clergy in the United States, Catholic and Protestant, since the colonial period. It was a great exposition of the way the role has changed over 3 centuries or maybe more. And then there were just 2 pages at the end, like, well, this is what it might mean. And as a practical theologian, I thought, well, that was nice part 1. Where's part 2? Which is, what should we do now in light of that history? There are a number of challenges in our contemporary situation that require careful thinking, and we need to develop wisdom in order to find our way forward, because at least for churches, but I think for society as a whole, it's not entirely clear how we should go forward. That's kind of evident, I think, in the polarization politically that's going on in our country. We have differing views about diagnosis and prescription for the issues that present themselves to us. I just want to focus briefly on 3 emerging issues that we all have to deal with, but we're not really sure what we should do, and so we need wisdom. So first, I'm going to just talk about the trends quickly, and then say something about people who've begun to develop wisdom around these things, and even churches and theological schools to think about these things. So one is the epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, and depression in our society. Second is financial instability and the question of sustainability. And then the third one is the rise of artificial intelligence and a potential loss of human agency and a human touch to things. There are a lot of additional issues we could talk about, but those sort of came to mind as 3 pressing matters before us today. And of course, we have to draw from the past and from biblical materials for sure, the history of the churches and from other thinkers, but it doesn't do our work for us to just look to the past. We also have to make some choices and try some things that are not entirely clear and see what happens, and then maybe make mid-course corrections. Okay, first, the epidemic of loneliness, anxiety, and depression. It's just astonishing, the mental health crisis that's all around us, especially, I would say, with people under the age of 40. Also, single dweller households is the fastest growing demographic in the United States. Something like 40% of households have 1 person in them. Ironically, though we're more connected than ever before through our devices and social media, people feel more isolated and alienated than in previous times. It may be captured in the title of a book by a sociologist at Harvard, Robert Putnam, called Bowling Alone. That now famous book argues that in absolute numbers, the same number of people are bowling as they were at the mid-20th century, but something has changed, and what's changed is people used to bowl in leagues. Now people bowl alone without being part of a team, and he uses that as a kind of metaphor, and he has all kinds of data to show that there's a fragmentation and disconnection that's going on in our society. And in fact, it's an epidemic, I would say, of not only loneliness, but also anxiety and depression. And, when you get into the anxiety and depression aspect of the mental health crisis, there's a lot of reasons for that. We've had the COVID problem. We have an environmental degradation that threatens the entire planet. We're almost on the verge, maybe, of a 3rd World War with Iran and Russia and others. There's a lot that causes younger people especially, to not have hope and to not have the traditional ways of gaining a strong sense of self. So that's a whole big thing, right? That's going on. We need to think about, what could we do about that? How do we respond to that problem? that interface of problems. Another one, though, and these overlap, is a concern about financial stability. The world economy is changing because of the internet and because of the shift in manufacturing. And the most important commodity today is information more than material things. But there's also the question of sustainability, especially for Americans. You know, we consume a disproportionate amount of the world's resources, and we're a throwaway society, and we buy things, use them up, and get new things. And then that our cast-off material has to go somewhere, and we ship it off to other countries. I mean, this is really, it's not a sustainable pattern of life. But yet our whole economy depends on buying new and improved things on a regular basis and always getting more. Overconsumption and waste will destroy the planet and will make the world uninhabitable if we don't think in some new ways about things. Also, there's a lack of good jobs, so that there are jobs, but working at low-wage service jobs isn't really sustainable for at least a middle-class lifestyle. And often the jobs that are available are not that meaningful. So in the midst of a changing economy, there are a lot of people who feel left out and who are not able to attain the American dream. And that's causing discontent, if not eventually leading to violence. So that's a whole cluster of issues. Another one is the rise of artificial intelligence. And there you've got people that are afraid of it, but also people who are embracing it. And it keeps getting stronger and stronger to the point where 10 years from now, you have to wonder whether people like Chip and I will even have jobs. Do we need schools? Maybe we just need a chip implant and a Wi-Fi connection to download Ugaritic, and you wouldn't have to study it. It'd just be in there. It could rewire your brain. It'd be nice in a way, but it loses the human touch. Also, all of our devices are integrated and talking to each other. And the question is, will there be any room left for us as humans eventually? In New Jersey, we used to have to stop on the Garden State Parkway or the Turnpike and pay tolls at booths or throw money in a basket. Those are completely gone. It's all automated. You get a device and it reads it automatically. And if you don't have the device, you get a love letter from the state government saying you owe X amount of money because the devices track your car and so on. That's just the tip of the iceberg of some big changes, but there are people working on these problems. And I think it's important to think that, or to realize that some of the solutions to these problems are going to be excellent and helpful, and probably not from religious people. And maybe most of those answers. But also, I think churches and religious communities have a role to play in addressing these things. And we're not just going to cook up answers on our own. We have to listen to what other people are saying. So, for example, there are ways to build local community, to get people connected to each other, non-traditional ways of connecting. But I think churches have a role to play. I think especially mainline Protestant churches, which are declining precipitously, we ought to be trumpeting the fact that we know how to do community. We know how to get people together, how to eat together, and how to have intergenerational interaction and to do positive health promoting kinds of things together. A lot of times people will come together around special interests in the internet. They'll find a way to connect and then go to events in the arts or sporting activities and things like that. And there's some wisdom that has emerged in how to do that, how to get people, like a flash mob to appear and to do something in a coordinated way. Meanwhile, the churches are kind of sitting on the sidelines, I think, not really being very creative about it. But we can borrow strategies from outside the religious communities. There's a kind of wisdom, just like you see in Proverbs. Not everything comes from the religious teachers. Some of it comes from other cultures or religious teachers in other other religious communities. And there's a lot of poaching going on of good ideas. And I think we should do that. Not everything has to have a cross on it. That is wisdom. In terms of financial stability, offering jobs for people for the new economy or training, giving people opportunities to retool is really key. Like last night, my wife and I were in Trenton for the Trenton Micro Loan Corporation, which aims at helping people who are formerly incarcerated establish jobs or businesses. And this effort gives them the tools and the skills they need to run a business, including accounting and how to do taxes and just a lot of basic stuff. But this is helping to equip people to be a positive part of society. And I think another area where, if you look at the demographics, one of the fastest growing job areas is service, but it's service for older citizens. The baby boomers are aging and are needing a lot of care. And it seems to me that in addition to schools and private enterprise that aims at providing care for senior people, that churches could become part of that and train people for this growing sector of the economy. In terms of AI, I do think there still will be room for humans. And the 4 C's, which have emerged, give me some hope. That is, probably the algorithms won't be able to do creativity like we can anyway, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. That's a kind of wisdom for the digital age. Like, we shouldn't think about doing things that machines can do better or faster. We should focus on doing things that only humans can do. And the 4 C's is a good place to begin with that. And, those 4 C's actually kind of overlap with a lot of things that Christians do and churches are about. I don't know if AI is going to take over or not, or if AI will become sentient. That will open up a whole new realm of questions about what is it to be human? What responsibilities do we have to sentient machines that are not carbon-based life forms? That's a whole nother thing about wisdom that would have to be developed. But there's some creative thinking that we can do now. All that's to say, those are just some illustrations. All that's to say that wisdom requires a lot of reflective judgment, pondering the issues, learning from experience, sometimes our own, but a lot of times from other people, and engaging in some creative experimentation. I'm not sure how much Proverbs and the other wisdom books talk about experimentation, but this is kind of a uniquely American idea, maybe, that we think things through, but still we don't know if things are going to work until you try it. And then you look at the effects of what you try, and then you go back to the drawing board, and it's a very iterative process. Wisdom, in a sense, develops through study and prayer and community and paying attention to experience, but also through trying things. This is part of how wisdom today, I think, develops. But we're not just going to, I think, have to borrow things from others who generate wisdom in the field of tech or bioengineering or business. I think actually Christian communities have something to offer the discussion about what wisdom means today. We want to always ask the question, to what end? What's the purpose of what we're talking about? Where does this go? We also want to think about means. Like the methods and the means of doing things do actually matter in terms of human dignity and value. And also we want to talk about God. I mean, that's kind of our business, is to say all of our ordinary human experiences and our problems, in some way, what distinguishes religious communities from other communities is that we refer those things to God. We connect them to, what does God have in mind, or where is God at work? And that's something that we can contribute to the development of wisdom that I think other communities probably can't, or at least not as well as we can, because we have resources like the Bible, and we have thousands of years of reflection and creativity. Maybe I would just end by saying that part of the development of wisdom that we would contribute as religious people has to do with theological imagination along the lines of what I just mentioned. I find a lot of help in the wisdom literature and in the Old Testament prophets about the use of metaphor and images that shift or open possibilities for new thinking. It's a long ways between the Iron Age and the Digital Age. I don't think humans have changed that much, but our worlds certainly have changed. And we need to foster ways to think dynamically and in fresh ways, but in ways that are informed by the past in order to find effective ways forward. I think I'll stop there.
I think they did pretty well with that small subject I gave them to consider. So we've got some time left before 12:30, and the floor is open for any questions or comments engaging these world-renowned scholars that we've got. I'm gonna let you hold on to a microphone and ask your question just to make sure it broadcasts well enough for them to hear you. Who's got a word to share?
My question would be is how do you deal with misinformation?
Misinformation. Well, that's a really good question. It's increasingly hard to tell in the times in which we live because the computers are able to generate visual images and sound bites and things that sound totally legitimate. Sometimes it's only another computer that can recognize that something's been fabricated. So I think that question we'll have to live with for some time to come. How do you distinguish between truth and falsehood? I mean, I think Proverbs has a lot to say about that. How we make that determination today is more complicated than it used to be.
Well, one of the things that we used to do was to realize that we're not all equally gifted in areas of wisdom or areas of knowledge, that we used to sort of figure out how to learn and trust those who know these things. So there's a way in which misinformation, sort of in the headlines is interesting. But if I think about misinformation about a reading of Proverbs 8, I think I can suss it out, right? I have the background to be able to do that in ways that maybe others don't. It's a poem. It doesn't just say anything, it says some things, and there are certain ways in which historically, culturally, linguistically, we can say truthfully what it says, which is not to say that there's not multiple takes, but not everything is there. So I always sort of use that as a way of thinking about other areas of knowledge. But it's the distrust, I think, of those who know it, and an unwillingness for us to sort of follow their wisdom.
I think the Proverbs also, or the book of Proverbs, as well as other books, gives us some criteria for critical thinking. Is whatever we're encountering and claiming to be true, does it somehow help us to grow closer to God? Does it help us to uphold human dignity and value? I mean, those are just two kinds of beginning points, but I think ancient wisdom can help us identify some with a smell test. Does it help us to become better, more empathic, caring human beings? if you play out, go following what's claimed to be true. I think actually we should do a lot more of this, helping people to develop a sense of criteria for discernment, because it's hard to tell on the face of things, but we have to ask, does this help us to be more relationally engaged, more, I think, more empathic, more grateful?
And a second question would be, our men's group is sort of looking at Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And in one chapter, he kind of distinguishes between fact and reason on one side and emotion and imagination on the other side. Like those are two different camps. How do you see wisdom sort of spanning both of them?
You want to do it?
I don't know if the idea is that there's this binary between fact and imagination, emotion and reason. There's been a lot of work done in the last 25, 30 years on emotion in particular, and the centrality to the thriving of our embodied selves. And so this sense that we can discard emotion in favor of cold, hard reason, and maybe this is not where the thought is going, but that's a dichotomy that doesn't really work if you think of ourselves as embodied beings. Emotions may well be the better in any given instance, the better clue to the better response, right? Even if I can't sort of articulate it, I'm totally an intuitive thinker. My mom helped me appreciate that your gut feeling sometimes you want to pay attention to. I don't know if that's going anywhere.
No, I think this is what you're saying is a good reason to not neglect the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament. The anthropology in Hebrew scriptures tends to be more holistic.
It is.
Right? You can't be human without a body. You can't be human without a mind. You can't be human without emotions and community. The New Testament is in a Greco-Roman framework with a lot of Greek ideas about the body is not really that great, and it's all about the soul or the rational soul. And that, I think that gets us into some trouble. And the only way to navigate New Testament claims about what it is to be human is to really have a deep grounding in Old Testament or Hebrew Bible visions of what it is to be human. We're not, like Plato said, souls trapped in a body. Well, interestingly, this is a little aside, but if I'm teaching Presbyterian history and theology this semester, if you look at all the confessions of the Presbyterian Church that are official documents in our Constitution, when it gets to the question of what happens when you die, basically it's Plato. It's a modified Plato. So your body goes in the ground, but your soul goes immediately to be with Christ and the Holy Trinity. And then on Judgment Day, you get glued back together. Your body is raised and your soul is put back together. And I don't think that was the right way to go. I think they should have read more Old Testament probably on this. You can't be human without a body. You can't be human without emotions and without reason and relationships. We're more like a network, nodes on a web, than individual rational units. More and more science kind of, I think, definitely leans in the direction of
neuroscience in particular.
Neuroscience points towards Iron Age Hebrew insights about what it is to be human.
Just don't know it.
Yeah.
Other questions? Phil's got one.
Maybe just something simple and informational. You mentioned 4 C's, and I wasn't sure where you're going with that. And what 4 C's you're talking about?
Oh, the 4 C's. Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't remember where I got this from, but it's floating around about in the digital age, what's uniquely human, that we can do that the machines can't do, and probably won't be able to do as well as we can, even if they can do these things to some extent. The 4 C's are creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. I'll just comment on 2 of those and then talk about the 7 C's. 2 of those, if you read, as I do, into paleoanthropology and human evolution, which I find fascinating and also informs my work as a religious educator, you compare human cognition to our 4 great ape cousins, the gorillas, the orangutans, chimps, and bonobos. And what's clear empirically and in the historical record is that humans have kind of 2 superpowers. One is imagination. The other great apes have that capacity, but not nearly the degree to which we do. And also, humans are super collaborators. The other great apes are pretty much in it for themselves. And if they collaborate at all, it's just to get what they want for themselves. And it's a temporary kind of thing. Like chimps can hunt little monkeys, but they don't have a sense of sharing and that kind of thing. But humans, so of the 4 C's, 2 of them at least are deeply rooted in uniquely human cognition. But communication goes with that, and also the critical thinking. But with a colleague from the University of Marburg in Germany, I'm working on a book on religious education called Sailing the 7 Seas. And we have these 4, and then we're adding 3 others. But it's really an attempt to try to figure out what is it going forward 10, 20, 30 years from now, humans will still be able to do, and that we can do, though we're in partnerships with the machines, that we still bring something to the table. And I think churches actually ought to focus on these as well, or at least this question: what's uniquely our contribution to the world that we're now in and will be more fully in? Especially when we have more integration of machines into our bodies, right? With implanted chips and replacement parts and many radio signaled computers that can be like so small that they're in our cells, which sounds like science fiction, but it's almost happening now. There's still some uniquely human things, and it's the 4 C's or maybe the 7 C's. I'll let you know when the book comes out.
Thanks. Other questions or comments?
Brian, surely you have a question for us.
He's out of time.
I'm out of time. My question
Lived with Brian before.
I know.
your book on the 7 C's, Gordon.
What's that?
Where can I buy your book on the 7 C's?
Well, he has to write it first.
Well, it's about 2/3 written, so I'll let you know when it'll be a year.
By the time you finish, it'll be 13 C's. So, no, but I just want to say thank you both very much. What I appreciate about both of you is that you are scholars who make connections through a number of different fields, and also understand the particular gifts that a church has in the context of it. And I think you've presented for us a nice challenge to be thinking about how we share the gift of truth and wisdom from the place of our training, and how we pass that on as a gift to our community and for future generations. Thank you very much for your time. And thank all of you for coming and making some time here today. Let's have a closing prayer, and then I'll be true to my word, right, Madam Chairwoman? Okay, so here we go. Thank you, God, for the gift of this time that we spend with one another, for the divine gift of wisdom that surrounds us and is available to us if we would but pause long enough to reflect and to receive it. Grant, O God, that this would be a continuing gift which the church can offer to the community, and which we can find as we engage on the crossroads of life, all the different callings that you have provided for us. As we pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys. I really
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Well, we'll talk to you soon. All
right.
Tonight, just check in. See you.